Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Dear students, Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the course Global Communication. I'm going to discuss with you today UNESCO and the New World Information and Communication Order. First, I'm going to talk about UNESCO, then later I will discuss the New World Information and Communication Order. So, UNESCO and its mandate for international cooperation can be traced back to a League of Nations resolution on 21st September 1921 to elect a commission to study feasibility. So, what does it mean by UNESCO, or the abbreviation of UNESCO? UNESCO means that United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization. This new body, the International Committee on Intellectual Cooperation, was created in 1922 and counted such figures as Henry Bergson, Albert Einstein, and Marie Curie and Robert Millikan. These were the people among its members, being thus a small commission of the League of Nations essentially centered on Western Europe. The International Institute for Intellectual Cooperation was then created in Paris on 9 August 1925 to act as the executing agency for the ICIC. However, the onset of World War II largely interrupted the work of these, which is called predecessors organizations. As for private initiatives, the International Bureau of Education began to work as a non-governmental organization in the service of international education or educational development since 1925 and joined UNESCO in 1969 after having established a joint commission in 1952. So what was the need of UNESCO creation? After the signing of the Atlantic Charter and the Declaration of the United Nations, the Conference of Allied Ministers of Education began meetings in London, which continued from November 1942 to December 1945, which means for 3 years. And then in 1943, the necessity for an international organization was expressed in the Moscow Declaration, agreed upon by China, the United Kingdom, the United States, and the USSR, which is Russia. This was followed by the Dumbarton Oaks Conference proposal of 1942. Upon the proposal of CAM, and in accordance with the recommendations of the United Nations Conference on an International Organization held in San Francisco in 1945, a United Nations Conference for the establishment of an educational and cultural organization was convened in London. The idea of UNESCO was largely developed by Rob Butler, the Minister of Education for the United Kingdom, who had a great deal of influence in its development. The Constitution of UNESCO was introduced and signed by about 37 countries, and pre-military commissions was established. The pre-military commissions operated between November 1945 to November 1946, which is almost 1 year, the date when UNESCO's constitutions came into force with the deposit of the 20th ratification by a member state. The first General Conference took place from November to December 1946, and they elected the Dr. Julian to Director General. The Constitution was amended in November 1954, when the General Conference resolved that members of the Executive Board would be representatives of the governments of the states, of which they are nationals, and wouldn't, as before, act in their personal capacity. This change in governance distinguished UNESCO from its predecessors. The ICIC, in how members states would work together in the organization's field of competence. As members states work together over time to utilize UNESCO's mandate, political and historical factors shaped the organization's operations, in particularly during the Cold War and the decolonization process and the dissolution of the USSR, which is Russia. Next, I'm going to discuss with you the New World Information and Communication Order. The New World Information and Communication Order is a term coined in a debate over media representations of the developing world. In UNESCO in the late 1970s and early 1980s. The New World Information and Communication Order, the movement was part of a broadened effort to formally tackle global economic inequality that was viewed as a legacy of imperialism upon the global South. The term was widely used by the McBride Commission, a UNESCO panel chaired by Nobel Peace Prize winner Sean McBride, which was charged with creation of a set of recommendations to make global media representations more equitable. The McBride Commission produced a report which is called Many Voices, One Word. It was a title which outlined the main philosophical points of the New World Information and Communication Orders. The fundamental issues of imbalances in global communication had been discussed for some time. The American media scholar Wilbur Scram, he noted in 1964 that the flow of news among nations is thin, that much attention is given to developed countries and little to less developing ones, that important events are ignored and reality is distorted. From a more radical perspective, the Herbert Scheller, he observed in 1969 that developing countries had little meaningful input into decisions about radio frequency allocations for a satellite is a key meeting in Geneva in 1962. The Scheller, he pointed out that many satellites had military applications like Intelsat, which was set up for international cooperation in satellite communication, was also dominated by the United States. In the 1970s, these and other issues were taken up by the non-aligned movements and debated within the United States and UNESCO. Next, I'm going to discuss with you that the mass media concerns began with the meeting of non-aligned nations in Algiers in 1973, again in Tunis 1976. Later in 1976, at the New Delhi, the Ministerial Conference of Non-Aligned Nations, the New Order Plan was textually formulated by the Tunisian's Information Minister Mustafa Masmoudi. The Mustafa submitted working paper of number 1331 to the McBride Commission. These proposals of 1978 were titled the Mass Media Declaration. The McBride Commission at the time was a 16-member body created by the UNESCO to study communication issues. The UNESCO work on the New World Information and Communication Order was immediately met with criticism for many areas.